Hello, and welcome to this very impromptu Novusphere Video Podcast. Yes, that's right. It is a video and a podcast into one. We are working on getting audio only version of the podcast out in the future, but for now it will be in the video format. This is something we want to do on a semi-regular basis because we know a lot of Novusphere members are not coming from the EOS community. They're coming from a different blockchain background. And we want to have a way for the community to stay up to date on everything that's happening on EOS now that the project have moved on to the EOS platform. Now you might not be entirely familiar with some of the topics we cover in this video podcast. If you want a quick summary of some of those topics, there is a video right here that you could click on. It's about 5 minutes long and give you an overview of those topics. Again, this was a very impromptu thing. I was already in the middle of a conversation with Asphyxia when I decided to hit the record button. So the recording actually starts in the middle of a conversation. And just to give you a bit of context, there is now a eBTC. Yes, that is a Bitcoin on the EOS network. It's basically a peg asset where you could trade your eBTC for a real BTC through the BitPi wallet. And one of the concerns that Asphyxia have is that what happens if the BitPi wallet gets hacked and they lose all their BTC? What will happen now with all these eBTC on the EOS network that can't be redeemed for Bitcoin? What recourse would the user have if that happens? So that's where the conversation starts, and here is the video.
What happens if their real BTC gets hacked and stolen? What's the recourse for the people holding eBTC on the EOS network?
Wait, but you're saying that if BitPi got hacked and lost their BTC, is what you're saying? Okay. I think that's a very valid point. But I don't know, like they say that they're a very reputable wallet provider. They say they've been operating for 5 years. They're endorsed by Bitcoin.org. Who is running Bitcoin.org, by the way? Is that Roger Ver or is that someone else?
Bitcoin.com is owned by Roger, but Bitcoin.org isn't.
Okay. Yeah, apparently they're endorsed by Bitcoin.org. Who are the guys behind Bitcoin.org?
Well, I mean, what do we mean by endorsed? If you mean like their wallet is on the Bitcoin.org site, it doesn't really take a whole lot to be on there.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I think that's what they meant. It's just the wallets on there.
I wonder how Bitcoin.org would feel about that if they knew their name was being used like that.
I don't know. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, okay. So one bit ether. Hold up, okay. I just gotta make sure this information.
This is not a new thing, by the way, at all. Like on BitShares, there was multiple companies or organizations on BitShares that used to do this exact same thing, where they would take assets like Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, and then they would issue an IOU on the BitShares network so that you were able to trade on the BitShares DEX using that asset.
Right. I mean, but like, was it useful? I mean, I will imagine like.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not useful. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying like it's very risky.
Yeah. That is true. Have any of the companies,
especially since they haven't outlined what their recourse is for if this were to happen. Right now, it's sort of just like, trust us that this won't happen. Right. So you're left with a what if. You don't know how they're going to handle it, right? So for example, when Bitfinex got hacked at one point, they shifted that entire liability onto their customers, right? They said, okay, thank you guys for being our customers. We're going to have to take some funds from all of you to cover our damages, and we're going to give you an IOU.
What, like, does that IOU translate to them actually getting their money back?
So they didn't really ever get their money back entirely. They were forced to settle in USD with Bitfinex being hacked. So Bitfinex paid it back in USD, but mind you, they paid it back after the price of Bitcoin had like skyrocketed. So very similar to sort of what happened with the Mt. Gox scenario, where Mt. Gox eventually did have enough money to pay back all the creditors of Mt. Gox, but that's because all of those people were forcibly being paid back in, fiat currency, Japanese yen, instead of being paid back in the amount of Bitcoin they lost on Mt. Gox.
So they paid in USD at the rate during when the exchange was hacked, not at the current rate.
Yeah, so okay, let
Okay.
me give you like a hypothetical scenario, right?
Right.
So imagine I'm BitPie, and okay, imagine I'm Bitfinex here, and I'm doing what BitPie does. So I have 1,000 BTC, and there's 1,000 EBTC, and I get hacked, and I lose half of my funds. So I only have 500 BTC, but there still exists 1,000 BTC or EBTC. So the way Bitfinex handled it is basically they took back forcibly, it's centralized exchange, but I mean you can also do this on EOS due to the mutability of the contract. They took back half of the Bitcoin that all their customers had, again in this hypothetical scenario, and what they did was they gave them back an IOU token that was settled in fiat with the price of Bitcoin at that point in time, and they said eventually this IOU token will be redeemable for real US dollar. And the token was actually, interestingly enough, tradable. And so what Bitfinex's plan was that I think it was like every 2 months, they would pay or they would buy back some of the outstanding IOU tokens from the market. So they completely shifted the liability of their losses onto their customers, and they forced their customers to burden that responsibility. And the price of Bitcoin, by all means, skyrocketed. So let's say, the price of Bitcoin when, this hack happened was like only $1,000, and then the price of Bitcoin, let's say a couple months later, is $10,000. Well, okay, now it's a lot easier for me to settle this, but, do you really want I'm paying you back essentially I effectively forced you to sell half your Bitcoin at $1,000.
Okay, fair enough.
So that's what I meant by like they forced everyone to settle on a certain position, which obviously people are going to be mad about if the price goes up, and if the price goes down, well, maybe they're not so mad about it, but it would take forever for them to get paid back at the rate that Bitfinex was paying them back at.
Right. Okay, so you see the problem you see is that there's something like that might happen where the file get hacked and they haven't outlined what the recourse if that happens.
Yeah, we don't know how they're going to handle that scenario,
Right.
and I don't really think there is a good way for them to handle it. I mean, their options are either they stick their customers, the clients, with the liability, or they pay it out of pocket themselves. And they have all the incentive in the world to shift it onto their customers because they're not legally liable for it.
When you say legally not liable for it, like, is that just like probably in the terms of agreement they set up, or just there is no legal action that can be taken against them?
I think it has a lot to do with it's very difficult to take legal action against them given the assets that are involved in this.
Right.
You don't really have a standard set on how to handle cases like this, so it would be a very long time for the legal process.
Okay. True. I mean, I guess like the only way you would do it, like a lot of people want a stable coin on EOS, and one of the ways to do it is kind of like what Steam did with the Steam dollars, right? Where you have like Steam tokens as collateral. I think it's something.
So, what's really interesting about that? Have you ever looked at a graph of Steam-backed dollars? Have you looked at the chart?
Like the price chart?
Yeah.
No, but not. I mean, I did, but I don't.
So it's supposed to be worth $1, right?
Yeah.
You take a look at the current price.
What's the token symbol for it?
I linked it to you in the chat.
Okay.
And at one point, Steam-backed dollars were even worth $13 a token.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing it like being above
So
a
I'm
lot
not
before.
exactly sure what's going on with this, but I think a good example, because okay, so after Dan left Steam,
Mhm.
and I don't know the full history of Steam that well because I
Mhm.
never really used the platform, so I'm like
Mhm.
paraphrasing on like memory and things that I've read. But after Dan left Steam, they made a lot of changes as to how this system works, and I think a lot of that had to do with or sorry, I think a lot of that affected the price of the Steam back dollars and how that system works. But Dan had this system of a collateralized back asset
Mhm.
to issue a stablecoin. He created that concept way back on BitShares, and we had this with
Mhm.
BitUSD and
Mhm.
BitCNY.
Mhm.
And then you had on Ethereum, you have DAI
Mhm.
Maker by
Mhm.
MakerDAO, and
Mhm.
MakerDAO and DAI are heavily based on the same concepts that Dan was using in BitShares, which was over collateralized assets and then
Mhm.
essentially taking out a loan against those assets.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you know this, but actually in the EOS white paper, it states, collateralized assets like that are a goal of EOS. So I
Mhm.
expect at some point, God knows when, Block
Mhm.
One is going to, put that out in terms of the software.
Mhm.
But I think anyone at this point in time, if they were really trying to innovate or at least push decentralization, they could implement the exact same approach that MakerDAO uses and implement a version of DAI on EOS. And
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
Ethereum as collateral, you would use EOS as collateral.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think Higher Vibes is doing something like that. But I think they're not collateralizing with EOS tokens, or they are, or like it's a mix of the two. Like they have their token, and then they have the EOS, and they collateralize both to create a stable token. I think
Yeah,
that's
so
what
I
it is.
saw the eCash thing by Higher Vibes, but I have never had a chance to look
Yeah.
into it and how it works. What confused me about it was it seems that you earn eCash by staking Higher Vibes, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't really need to actually do anything other than, stake. So you're not running like software or anything like that. You are just locking up some tokens in a contract, and it's confusing to me, especially since like I said, I haven't actually looked into it, how
Mm-hmm.
exactly they're generating a stable coin for people doing that.
Well, they say it uses the same mechanism as Steam dollars. So I guess like when they're staking it, you are essentially putting it into like collateral, kind of like MakerDAO is like it's the same idea, right? You put in some Ethereum and you get these DAI tokens, which is like a stable coin.
That's It's not the same.
Sorry?
So with it's not the same. So with
Okay.
do you want me to turn the voice changer off for the time being since
No,
we're just talking here?
I'm actually recording you already, so this is perfect.
Oh, okay.
It was just an interesting conversation, and
um,
I didn't want to interrupt. So
yeah, no problem.
yeah.
If with the uh with the higher vibes,
Mhm.
from the way I understand, like the way it works is, you stake your higher vibes and you get back eCash, and this is
Mhm.
done like essentially passively.
Mhm.
Um, so after you're staking, eventually you can go and claim these rewards, but that's not how it works with DAI and Maker in that case. The way that works is you put up some amount of collateral. So let's say the price of Ethereum right now is $100,
Mhm.
and so let's say you put up 10 Ethereum as your collateral.
Mhm.
Um, so your loan can be up to, sorry, your collateral has to represent at least 150% of whatever your loan is.
Mhm.
So what I mean by that is, so for example, um, if you have 10 Ethereum as your collateral, that's $1,000, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you were to take $1,000 and one second, just give me 1 second here. So if you take $1,000 and you divide it by 1.5, so 150%,
Mhm.
um, you get $666.
Mhm.
So that's the maximum amount that you could take out as a loan against your collateral.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, if the price moved below that just by a small amount, because then you'd be uh, above the 150% collateral, sorry, below it, um, then you'd be your collateral would be forcibly seized and auctioned off.
Mhm.
So it's not really a passive process. It's you're over collateralizing a position to
Mhm.
borrow money from the system essentially.
Mhm.
And the advantage of doing this is you don't actually have to sell your Ethereum.
Mhm.
So maybe I should re-explain that now, like now that I actually have my thoughts like better put together on it. Sorry about that. I was kind of all over the place.
No, no, no. I mean, I understand what you say. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I understand. I think the only thing is that, like, well, maybe this is using what you're saying is that the way eCash works is passive in the terms of that even if the value of the underlying asset fluctuates, nothing happens essentially.
Yeah, I have no idea how it works. It just from what I know, and from what I've seen, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm completely wrong about this. Is it seems like you stake these tokens
Mm-hmm.
and you're given back a stable coin for staking your tokens
Mm-hmm.
over a period of time. And I don't know what the process behind the backing of what actually gives that stable coin value is and how just staking these coins produces that value, especially since you're not staking your coins to participate in validating a network or anything like that. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's essentially passive income. It's almost like a dividend almost. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not a dividend because it's not as if Higher Vibes has cash flow, in
Mm-hmm.
contrast to, let's say, some of these dice games or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm very confused as to where the money comes from, but I haven't read their paper or really looked extensively into their project to be able to say anything conclusively. So that's why I have to clarify everything I'm saying with, yeah, I could be entirely wrong about my understanding of Higher Vibes.
Yeah, no worry. I mean, I think, sorry, I think it's for them. It's probably just a way to use a familiar terminology. If I was doing this thing, how I imagine it would be working is that you stake your EOS with me, which is, like essentially I'm taking your EOS as a loan. You're loaning EOS to me, and I'm paying like interest in a stable token, or what's supposed to be a stable token. That's the way I would imagine how it works. Which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like if you're an application developer and you need like the resources, let's say you have to stake for CPU or whatever. Let's say for the forum, right? We have an influx of users and we don't have enough CPU to cover the free account for everybody. We would,
I just realized I think we might have been talking about the wrong thing. I think what we were both talking about was Horus Pay, which is
oh
the
yeah,
eCash one, not Higher Vibes.
could be.
Yeah, I was just looking it up because I was trying to see if I could find anything as to an explanation of how eCash works.
Okay. Do you have a link to that?
Okay, I found the white paper. I'll put a link to it in our chat.
Okay.
And okay, it's only 7 pages, so it shouldn't take too long to skim through this.
It doesn't mention anything about stablecoins.
Okay, so they mention it in section 3.2.
Okay.
Which says, in order to access the portal, users need to stake Horus token every 30 days until Horus dollar, which I'm assuming is eCash in this case, reaches its distributed consensus of $1.2 billion, approximately 82 years. The Horus token will generate a digital asset called Horus dollar at a 0.1 interest rate. When Horus dollar reaches its distributed consensus, the Horus token will no longer be stakeable.
Okay.
So I still don't understand from reading that what actually gives the Horus dollar any value whatsoever. Aside from the fact that maybe the Horus dollar is usable in their platform, but this is, all under the assumption that they can convince people to use this Horus dollar and take it as a means of payment. So let me read 3.3. Hang on. So it says the payroll vendor can immediately exchange Horus dollars for fiat currency when they are paid. But so again, what I don't understand there is where's the money coming from that is doing this exchange? Right? Where's the money coming from? Where's the real fiat currency coming from that backs the eCash, the token that is supposedly these vendors are cashing out on?
Okay. Yeah, that is true. That is a little strange.
But let me just re-explain, for clarity's sake, the whole MakerDAO thing and the difference here. Now that like I said, I have my thoughts together. So the way it works is your loan has to be, it can't be. You have to over collateralize your position. So if you borrow, let's say $500 from the system, you have to have at least $750 worth of Ethereum collateralized in the system. And if it slips under the 150% threshold, so let's say it goes to 140%, due to the price of Ethereum dropping, then your collateral is then auctioned off and sold. And that's how they maintain the peg, is the collateral is auctioned off if you fall under this 150% position. And the problem with that, which they also are very transparent about, and this is something Dan's also talked about back on BitShares, is you have the problem of what's called the black swan event. And the black swan event is an unforeseen market scenario that happens very quickly and it's very unprecedented, where, for example, if the price were to drop fast enough, DAI or this system would essentially lose its peg because the asset could not be auctioned off fast enough and it would be under collateralized after being auctioned off. And there is an interest rate associated with the system. I believe the current rate of DAI is 2.5% a year. And so when you go to pay back your loan, again, let's say we borrowed $500, and we paid it back a year later. Well, you'd be paying back, only 2.5% on that, which is like $12-13. So that's also how the people that are that have the maker token earn a profit from this, is the interest on the loans that are paid out.
Well, one of the things I don't get, well, two things is that one of the things that people want from a stablecoin is to kind of, when they when they kind of want to, the market's doing bad, they don't want to hold their cryptocurrency anymore. They want to have a stable coin. But by taking out those DAO loans, you're still exposed to the market condition, which is if the value drops under 150%, it's going to get liquidated. So like,
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? So you don't have to take out a loan to get DAI, because you can always just buy DAI from someone else.
right.
Right? There are people who will exploit the system of how DAI works, whether it's intentional or not, to use it effectively as a decentralized version of margin trading. And so what I mean by that is I'm effectively given a margin for my Ethereum in this case. So again, let's go back to the example of using 10 Ethereum, right? And the price is, let's say, $100. So, I have $1,000 of Ethereum locked up in collateral. I take out a loan of 500, and with that loan, I go and buy 5 more Ethereum. So in total, I have 15 Ethereum, but 10 of it's locked up in the loan. So let's say the price of Ethereum goes up to maybe $200 for easy math. Well, okay, so now I can sell my 5 Ethereum for $1,000. I can pay back the loan, which was 500. Let's ignore the interest rate for simple math here. And now I have an additional $500 plus my original 10 Ethereum that I started with. So I can use it as a margin position.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
And there are people who will use it that way, right? So there are people that will take out a loan to buy more Ethereum or to buy more of a cryptocurrency. And you have to also remember that people who are getting margin called and their assets are being seized. So, for example, your collateral falls under the 150%. Your asset is being auctioned off. The Ethereum, right, is being auctioned off for DAI. So it creates liquidity for DAI on the market. So maybe in your case, what you talked about is you don't actually want to take out a loan. You just want to buy DAI, right? Which is what the Oasis DEX that MakerDAO has is for. So in this case, where you just want to peg to a stable currency, you just buy DAI. You don't take out a loan.
Okay. That's very interesting, actually. I haven't looked into how DAI works just because it seemed very, very complicated. But now that you explain to me, it all makes sense.
Yeah, actually, so interestingly enough, when I took a look at DAI, it came across to me as very confusing. And I actually remember I had shown it to Brian a long time back, and I knew that he has more of a background in finance and this sort of thing, so I actually asked him to explain it to me. And so I got a pretty good understanding about it after he explained it to me, and I read a little bit more about it myself.
You asked Brian to explain it to you?
Sorry, say it again?
You asked Brian to explain it to you?
Yeah, because I had shown it to Brian and I asked him what's his thoughts on this. Like, does it seem like it'll work? Because I showed it to him when DAI had was just coming out, like when Maker was just coming out and going public with everything. Everyone's was skeptical about it because the biggest problem with BitUSD and BitCNY, which is what DAI was based on, was liquidity. BitUSD and BitCNY didn't have a good liquidity system. It didn't have this sort of feedback loop to provide liquidity in terms of seizing loans and selling them off and that sort of thing. And so this was a concern that I had about DAI, and then I sent it to him to take a look at, and he said it seemed like it was a really good idea and that it should work, without assuming there aren't any black swan events. And so again, I asked him to explain this, and as he was explaining it, I actually remembered that Dan had explained something very similar back when he was talking about BitUSD and BitCNY.
Okay, so go back to the auction. When it's auctioned off, is essentially using that Ethereum to buy back DAI? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So for example, so let's say it falls below the threshold. Okay, so let's say we'll use a really good example here. So let's say I locked up $1,000 worth of Ethereum, so 10F at $100, let's say, and I took out a loan of 666, which is 150% of that would be $1,000. So literally, I'm on the very border of it. So let's say the price of ETH drops, let's say $5, and the MakerDAO system is running its rounds. Okay, well I'm under the collateral at this point. So what's going to happen is my 10 ETH, which is now $95, so it's worth a total of $950. What the MakerDAO system is going to try to do is it's going to try to auction off and sell my Ethereum onto the market for 950 DAI. So people that are participating in the Maker system are going to want to participate in this auction, right? Because if you think about an auction, let's say I decide to auction off one Ethereum to a bunch of people. The auction should logically trend towards the actual market rate of Ethereum.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because we have liquid markets for Ethereum USD.
Okay.
So essentially, the system is then able to reclaim DAI from the public, as well as releasing the Ethereum that was held for the collateral.
Okay. No, that part makes sense. The only part that I am a little confused about is that when you talk about this market, where is this market that exists?
Give me one sec.
This is not like an open exchange, right? Like, because there's no central. It is an open exchange.
Yeah, hang on. So that's the exchange, Rand, that's associated with the Maker DAO system. So you can read a little bit about it here as well, and you can see their pairs on CoinMarketCap. So the exchange is literally for the purpose of providing price stability and doing this auction sort of thing between Ethereum and DAI and Maker.
Okay, and this is exchange on the Ethereum network?
Yeah, it's a decentralized exchange.
Ah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, okay, that was the only question I was thinking, like, is this like marketplace you're talking about on the network itself, or is it a open public kind of centralized exchange? But yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, I think we should probably implement something like this, but probably block that one's doing it.
Yeah, so like I said before, in the ESO.io white paper, they did mention stablecoin. So I would expect Block One to come out with something similar to this at some point.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that is a very interesting system, and it seems to work for Ethereum, so I don't see why it wouldn't work for EOS. The only thing is, like you said, that Black Swan event where the price drops by, like, I don't know, 75%, and then it couldn't liquidate fast enough, and everything just goes to shit.
Yeah, it has to be a flash crash that's sustained. It can't just be like a flash crash that bounces back up because of how the system works. If the flash crash isn't sustained, it won't actually affect DAI. But if we see a flash crash of like 90%, like overnight, that could be very problematic.
I mean,
or at least that's my understanding of it.
But that's not like unthinkable, right? This is crypto we're talking about. Like, it's not like we haven't had.
I think in some of the less liquid cryptocurrencies, that's very possible. But I think given the fact that Ethereum has been around for so long, it's had enough time to become a little more well distributed in terms of its coin distribution, per holder. So I think there's a less case, or there's not as likely of a case of having a sustained crash that happens very quickly. That's not to say we can't lose, 90% of the market cap. I mean, look at what's happened over the last, couple months. But this was a process that happened, losing a couple percent every day.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add to that conversation.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find the part about the stablecoin assets that I remember seeing.
On the EOS white paper?
Yeah. Or at least I remember seeing something like that, but maybe it's somewhere else that I'm thinking. Because I'm skimming through the white paper right now and I'm not seeing it in there.
I don't remember reading something like that actually. And then like it would be strange to include it in the white paper because I think this is more of the outline of the technical aspects of the software rather than like I would imagine something like a DAI would be like a more of a product thing along the lines of
Mhm.
Steam and that kind of stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit about the referendum as well?
Yeah, sure.
So what's the best link? Send me the link that you think is the best for understanding what whether the referendum is.
Yeah, sure. Hang on. So I think there's a few resources here by EOS Canada for some information on the referendum. And I believe there is some stuff by EOS Nation on the referendum as well that I'm looking for right now.
Okay, cool. So, very basically, what is the referendum and why is it important, and what can we as token holders do after that system is live?
Yeah, so the referendum is a missing piece in the EOS governance system.
Mm,
So as it is right now, you have the block producers, you have ECAF, and now you're going to have this referendum system. And the referendum system is probably the best way for token holders to represent themselves, aside from voting for block producers that they think are valuable to the system. So the way the referendum works is someone can put forward a proposal
uh-huh,
for some sort of change to happen in the system that breaks the status quo. So take for example the Rex.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
One of the reasons that have been discussed as to why the Rex might need a referendum is because um, the proposal for the Rex talks about spending EOS from the savings account which EOS has flown to, that's been collected in fees. So from like RAM trading and from name auctions.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
And so at this point in time, status quo is nobody is allowed to spend from this account. And so
uh-huh,
because the Rex wants to start spending from this account, this is a breach to status quo. So that is one of the arguments as to why the Rex needs a referendum.
uh-huh,
So the
uh-huh,
way the referendum process works is after it's been proposed, um, everyone is then able to go to a referendum voting portal,
uh-huh,
and there will be several different voting interfaces that you can use,
uh-huh,
and you are then able to cast a vote of your opinion on the referendum. So in this case, maybe for the Rex, it might be, do you approve of this or do you disapprove of this? Yes or no. And so your vote directly corresponds to um, how much you have staked. Um, And similar to how it works for voting for block producers, you can elect a proxy to vote for you. But I believe one difference is that even if your proxy votes, you yourself can still vote differently than your proxy has voted, and it will discount your vote from the way your proxy voted. So
It
you can,
discount my vote.
yeah. So for
Oh.
example, like let's say you have a total of 10 EO staked, and you have some proxies set, and so the proxy represents a total of 1,000 EOS, and the proxy chooses to vote yes. So at that point, there's 1,000 EOS being contributed towards yes by the proxy, and then let's say you choose to vote no. So now the proxy is only representing 990 EOS as towards yes, because your 10 EOS is being represented towards no. Right, so this is a little different than how it works with block producers, because if you set a proxy to vote for block producers, you can't vote differently than how your proxy is voting without opting out of that proxy. You're sort of along for the ride with however that proxy chooses to vote for BPs.
Okay. And is this the same proxy we're talking about, like, or do we delegate to a different proxy for voting on a referendum? This is the same proxy.
I believe it's the exact same proxy
Okay,
that you have
okay.
set for block producers.
Okay. So you just have the additional option of voting on the referendums that your proxy might not agree with.
Yeah, so you're encouraged to still vote even if you have a proxy set, because like I said before, you might have a differing opinion than your proxy, and you actually have a chance to express yourself in this system differently than your proxy does.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
obviously, if you vote the same as your proxy, then your net outcome is the same, right? So again, like, you voted yes, your proxy only represents 990, but you voted yes, so you add the 10 in, you still have 1,000. So
Okay. And this is by stake, so by amount of token, EOS token staked.
yeah, so only the amount that you have staked is what matters. So if you have free floating EOS, it does not count as towards your voting weight in the referendum process.
And like, what is this? Is more of an opinion poll. Like it is not how to say it, is not like a smart contract where if a threshold is reached, that change will push automatically. This is more like we're gonna have a vote and we're gonna see the result. Most likely, what block producers will is comply with that vote and upgrade the system, but this like is not hard coded to update automatically. Is that correct?
Yes, so I think this is the pragmatic way of handling this, because there's a lot of complications with if you wanted to handle this automatically. So for example, like let's say you propose uh, a change to the status quo, like the Rex, for example. Um, you know, what if the Rex was proposed before any of the code for it was written and the community approved of it? So this raises an interesting question of, okay, now whose job is it to write the code for this? Who's going to do the testing for this? And all of that. And in some cases, you might have a referendum, and this is a hypothetical case that passes, that's just completely infeasible to implement on a technical level. It just might not be possible. And so in scenarios like that, it makes sense that the BPs can sort of veto these type of proposals because, well, like I said, they're simply not technically plausible. But in the case that you have BPs that don't uphold referendums that should be possible, and all the resources are there, then I believe the thought process here is that those BPs should be voted out. And my concern here is that while that sounds nice, in practice what we've seen is um, bad BPs or BPs not doing their job properly aren't actually being voted out. So this raises, to question what will actually happen in this case scenario if we do run into it. So I do have some concerns in that regard.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. I actually did a video with JC from ES4s showing that Start EOS and various Hubei. There was a document, I'm not sure if you remember, that came out that shows them like colluding with each other in vote buying. But look at it now, like they're still on top of the block producers list. So yeah, I don't know. Like I think I think that concern is very valid. Um,
I think what's interesting about it too is that even when there is so before there was plausible there's deniable plausibility to it. With the Huobi case, it was a leaked document that there
mhm,
was no actual confirmation of that this was
mhm,
going on, and it was purely speculative. And then while
mhm,
we can speculate that it's very likely, there wasn't conclusive evidence to show that this is the case.
mhm,
Now, since the Start EOS incident, there's very conclusive evidence to show that they're buying votes. I mean, they're the ones telling people themselves that they're paying votes to people. Now,
mhm,
whether you see
mhm.
that as a malicious intent or not is up for debate. But the point is that according to our current in-place constitution,
Right.
um, that is supposed to be a placeholder, but it's still supposed to be upheld, quote quote.
Mhm,
They're clearly breaking this by offering this to the public. And I think what is most alarming to me is the passiveness that we're seeing from the existing BPs. Because, from my understanding of how the EOS system works, is if two-thirds plus one of the BPs agree, they can actually forcibly remove someone
mhm,
from a
mhm.
BP spot.
Yeah.
And we are not seeing any of the Western BPs or any of the other Asian BPs or any BP for that matter really propose, that they should removing Start EOS as a BP. We're seeing very passiveness from the BPs, and this gives me a big reminder of the sort of the chicken and egg problem that the Bitcoin community faced with doing a hard fork to increase the block size.
Mhm,
We
mhm.
saw a lot of support from miners to increase the block size. I believe at one point Bitcoin Unlimited had over 50% of the hash rate. And
Mhm.
even though they had more than 50% of the hash rate, right? So again, to compare this to EOS, even though we know that there's two-thirds plus one of BPs that have the ability to pull the trigger on this, they never pulled the trigger on forcibly trying to fork the network um, to a higher block size,
Mhm.
right? Everyone was very passive about this. And
Mhm.
even when they finally did fork the network, which was Bitcoin Cash, they did it with replay protection. And Bitcoin Cash obviously has a much lower hash rate than Bitcoin does now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think this passiveness that we're seeing from BPs is very similar to the passiveness we see from miners over in Bitcoin, and I don't think it's going to be good for the ecosystem in the long run. But I think the big part of the problem is nobody wants to be seen as like the bad guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, like EOS New York. Uh, so just 2 points. One is that the intern constitution is not very effective, and it's largely been ignored. Like we enforce some parts of it some of the time. Like the example being ECAF, right?
Mhm.
So EOS New York did put out a new constitution, and one of the things I wonder is that when we have this referendum in place, is one of the things that we're gonna do is update the constitution, which again, like it would be pretty dramatic move to do
Yeah, so
that.
I believe it's always been a plan to put the Constitution to a vote to
Mhm,
get it ratified,
mhm,
and I believe the process for ratifying the Constitution will be through the referendum process. So whether that is the current version of the Constitution as we know it, somebody could propose that, or
mhm,
whether it's a newer version of the Constitution, such as some of the revised versions that we've seen come out.
mhm, mhm.
So I think we're gonna have to wait and see what the results on that are. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think the point here is if it's not enforceable by code and we're not socially enforcing it either, then what good is it?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree.
So this is one of the big concerns that I have.
Agree. And it's a very valid concern. I think that also goes to like the culture of the cryptocurrency space as a whole, where we are very against governance, even on EOS, right? EOS was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be unashamedly governed on chain, but we are seeing some of that. Like, oh, even Dan came out like saying that he kind of backtracked a little bit, which was kind of surprising for me. Like, oh, we should just have the Constitution and the recording contract to enforce parts of the agreement regarding to code. So like not even like what I mean by that is like if the software goes wrong and it doesn't function according to the recording contract, then we step in. Versus something like the constitution we have, which is a very um, social document, a human document, where it's not related to software. Like things like vote buying, like that's not related to software. That could only be enforced by people. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know. Like there does seem to be a hesitation in trying to enforce some of these agreements we ourselves wanted to include in the system. So
Yeah, I think as well one of the interesting things about it is we talk about the Constitution not being upheld by the BPs, but also we have to also point out that Block One could be holding up the Constitution as well, right? I mean, we can't forget that Block One does have a bunch of EOS that they could be voting with, and they could be flexing their muscles in terms of their voting stake to vote out these bad BPs. But I think the risk that that carries is if Block One starts voting with their entire 10%, that is enough for them to actually elect all 21 block producers, which I think a lot of the community would be okay with because a lot of the community sees Dan sort of, as this benevolent person in this case. But I think from an outside perspective, it would be very negative because a lot of people would just see it as EOS being centralized and Block One being, the dictators, whether they're benevolent or not.
no, I agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why they have abstained from voting, because like it is I call it the nuclear option, right? Like if something dramatic has to happen, like block that one. It's the last resort. It's not something block that one wants to do. Like they want to kind of just let it play out, see how the system works without their involvement. Because again, if they step in, they single-handedly vote in the top 21 block producer. They could pass any legislation or any referendum changes they want, like easily. So yeah.
I think another problem that we have to consider, and this has actually been talked about in the referendum chat, is should exchanges be allowed to vote with their customers' funds? And I think we could see something trying to address that in the newer drafts of the Constitution that are eventually proposed via the referendum.
And how will you enforce that? Like, do you just blacklist the exchange accounts? Like,
Yeah, so it wouldn't be, again, this is not something that's automatically enforceable by code. It has to be socially enforced by the BPs. And yeah, I believe it would work something similar to that, which is you would essentially exclude the votes of certain accounts.
okay. I mean, yeah, I think that's pretty much the only way to do it, right? And it's not the best way to go about it, but it will be the only way to go about it. Unless like the exchanges themselves implement some kind of portal that could be verified by all the block producers that it works as intended, and they allow the users to vote through the exchange, which could, in theory, be something that could happen.
Yeah, I believe some exchanges do offer something like that, where their uh, their holders of EOS on the exchanges are allowed to vote. I'm not exactly sure how that works in practice, but I mean, it's clear that not every exchange offers that at this point, and we don't know if those exchanges that don't offer it, whether they are voting or not with their customers' funds.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, do you have anything else to add to the referendum system?
Um, I think it's a good system. There's a lot of use cases for it outside of just dealing with EOS governance. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, how you do the tally of the votes
Mm-hmm.
is really up to the implementation of the clients using the referendum. So, obviously, in terms of EOS governance, all the clients are and all the voting portals are pretty much in agreement that they are basing it off of the amount of EOS that's staked in this, proxy system that I talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
But other projects could use the referendum system for their internal governance, and they could, for example, do a tally instead of based on the amount of EOS that's staked, based on the amount of their own project token that's staked, or some other metric. So it's a very
Mm-hmm.
flexible system that can be used outside of EOS governance, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it'll be interesting to see what use cases outside of EOS governance the community finds for the referendum process.
What do you see it being used for?
I think projects, especially for example DAOs,
Mm-hmm.
can use the referendum to help govern their projects in terms of development and or decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like I said, the tallying for how you count the votes would be maybe based off the a token that's associated with the DAO that's either staked or liquid, however they want to count that vote.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, you mean he's giving this is like a general purpose governance tool, right, on the EOS network, and like you say, it could be adapted by any project.
Yes,
Novusphere
so, I
could be.
mean, interestingly enough, it doesn't just need to be used for governance too. It could be used purely for survey purposes, right? So, for
Mm.
example, I could propose a referendum of do you like pizza, yes or no?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. True, true. I guess that's something Lumias would probably be interested in since they're doing like a survey application.
I don't know anything about them, so yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting project. They essentially incentivize people to vote in the polls and they exchange that information for like business partners. So like if you interested in knowing how many people prefer a blue UI versus a yellow UI, you could like conduct a poll,
Mhm,
voters would be incentivized and then business would get the result. So it's pretty cool.
I see. So tell me a bit about the sister chains that are happening on EOS, because I think you might actually have done a little more research than me on this. Like, for example, EOS Force and Telos.
Mhm.
So let's talk about EOS Force first. So what's the difference in their governance process than how it works currently on EOS?
So yeah, they actually do have a pretty interesting governance system in that one of the first things they did was change the one token 30 votes, which is what we have on EOS, to one token one vote. So the logic behind that is, let's say you are a whale, right? Right now, if you're a whale like block one, you could vote in the top 21 block producers in one go because you could vote for 30 block producers. Limiting it to one token, one vote means at most you can only get one of the block producers that you want into the top 21. So like that's one of the reasonings for that. And another thing they have in the governance system is that they have what I call like built-in vote buying, where if you vote for a block producer and that block producer gets to the top position, you as the voter actually get paid 70% of the block producer reward. So the interesting thing is that now what is happening is not the block producer that's paying you, it's the system itself paying you for that vote. So I don't know, I think that's really interesting.
Okay. And is there anything to um, that would prevent, let's say, a BP from offering some additional payment on top of that?
No, no. So that, I mean, obviously, yeah,
Okay.
that is still a concern, and I'm sure their constitution or user agreement
I think I did
states
see
that.
something in the referendum chat about paying. I think there was some. I don't remember what the document was or what the
Mhm.
context was, but I think I did see a proposal like in the referendum chat about changing it so that it was like 1% goes to like BPs and 2% goes to like voters, and like another two, and the remaining 2% goes to either like worker proposals or like the Rex or something. It was something like that. I don't remember the exact details of it.
Well, I think.
So I think something about like paying voters could be discussed as well as brought or proposed through the referendum system as well.
Yeah, again, like I'm not entirely sure how it would play out. Like from what I heard from JC, he said the system is very effective. They have over 90% voter turnout. Um, yeah, but what we are seeing with like the Rex implementation and Shintai, as an example, like those are already like systems that reward people who stake their tokens, right? So with Shintai, they actually became like the second or third highest proxy with the amount of tokens they have, the customers' tokens. And the same thing's gonna happen with Rex. Like once people get rewarded by staking their token, they're gonna more people are gonna stake, and you have a larger voter pool. The problem with that is that we still don't have like the system paying for the voters when they vote. So the block producers might still be incentivized to kind of just try to bribe the votes. So
Yeah, I think even the voting is encouraged more. I don't think necessarily that will address problems because, for example, just because voting's encouraged, it doesn't actually encourage voters to do research to vote for good BPs or to elect a good proxy. Really, it just encourages you to vote. So whether that's voting for random, 30 block producers, or whether it's voting for the existing 30 block producers, or whether it's just setting a proxy that everyone else has set, it might not actually, in practice, be the desired effect of what we're trying to get out of that.
yeah, no, I agree, 100%. Yeah. Well, that's EOS Force, and for Telos, what they are doing, they essentially kept the same system as EOS. The only difference is that they have, when they're giving out the tokens, they're giving out with the Genesis Snapchat, and they are capping the maximum amount of tokens you could have on each account, each Genesis account at 40,000. So the maximum you can have is 40,000 on any account. So it doesn't matter if you had like, let's say Block.one's account, which had like 100 million EOS tokens, it will still only have 40,000.
Okay, that's only for like the snapshot though, right? Like someone can own more than 40,000.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So now
Okay,
I'm
it's
pretty
interesting.
I'm pretty split on that again because it seems very anti-capitalistic to me. Like some people call it communist. I wouldn't go that far to as to call it communist. But it does like I'm not sure if that's a good culture to start off, where your solution to uh, inequality is kind of just capping everyone at the maximum. Like what happens? Like wealth naturally concentrates, right? So what happens in the future when when Telos tokens start to concentrate again? Are they just gonna like do another cap, or they gonna just try to be distributed? Like I don't think it's a. I think it's a short-term solution for a long-term problem.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you, especially on that point of wealth concentrate over time.
Yeah. So and also like their founders team apparently they're allowed to have more than 40,000. I think they have like something like 18 million tokens. So obviously they have a hugely disproportionate, uh,
Mm,
wealth in that ecosystem.
right, I see.
Yeah. I also wanted to say something else about Telos, but I forgot. But yeah, so that's Telos. I mean, it looks like they're a pretty serious group. Oh yeah, one of the statistics they gave out was that only 0.98% of all the Genesis account had more than 40,000 tokens. So that was a really interesting statistic they threw out. And I think that was because obviously one, you have Block.one owning a lot of tokens, but also a lot of exchanges. Because you remember,
Yeah,
EOS tokens were being traded before the network was launched. So what happened was a lot of the tokens were sitting around in exchange accounts.
Right.
So yeah. So I mean, I guess like it makes sense that they did that because they want to get rid of the exchanges, the influence of exchanges in the network, which makes a lot of sense, I think. So yeah,
Okay, that's interesting.
yeah. I mean, there are some other network experimenting with different governance systems, but I just don't have them on top of my head. Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering. I guess this is a bit of a open-ended question here. Is do sister chains devalue the worth of the resources provided by owning EOS? So let me elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that.
Mhm.
So, for example, if I were to build my DApp on, let's say, a sister chain, on Telos or EOS Force or whatever,
Mhm.
the disincentive someone generally has as to building on a side chain versus building on a main chain is the security provided by the chain. So the
Mhm.
assumption here is, the main chain provides the most security.
Mhm.
But, in terms of hashing power, I understand that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But in terms of the way EOS currently works, I'm skeptical as to whether just because there is more tokens financially
Mhm.
electing these BPs, that it's more secure just
Mhm.
because of that monetary value, especially because we've seen that, for example, bad BPs don't get voted out.
Mhm.
So, can we really correlate, the token value to security in the same way we do, hash power to security on other blockchain networks on EOS? And
Mhm.
if we can't, then doesn't that mean that sister chains are more appealing in that regard since resources on them are far cheaper, for RAM and CPU and net and that sort of thing?
Sorry, a little sick. But I think that's a very understandable mindset coming from like the proof of work cryptocurrencies, where the security networks equivalent to the hash power, right? Which to be honest, I think that's a false assumption, but I'll get back to that in just a bit. On like you're right on EOS, this like the hash power is not really a concern because you have these known actors that run the blockchain, right? If anything malicious happens, they can handle it. In terms of does Sister change devalue the EOS mainnet? I don't think so because you should look at EOS like the value EOS network less in this like the security term, but more in the network effect. Like Facebook is much more valuable as a platform to people than let's say I don't know what's a smaller Tumblr, right? They have a much bigger user base, and it's the same thing on iOS because like we haven't seen it happening too much just yet, which is a shame. But you have all these applications that could interact with each other, and it's that network effect of these applications that makes EOS that valuable. So if
Okay, I think that's a fair point to make.
yeah, exactly. Oh, like a perfect example is if you're a game developer, do you want to develop your game on Facebook or do you want to develop your game on Tumblr, right? You have a much bigger, well, I guess it's not a perfect comparison, but you get what I'm saying, like,
I get what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah. And going back to
Yeah,
like,
I think that's a fair point to make.
yeah, because like you just have access to all these applications that are already built. It's kind of like software layers you can almost think of, right? Like for a perfect example, my friend Zach made it's a very simple thing, but he made something that you could store your profile picture in. Once you have that on your network and people start using that, your application, once you integrate with it, like it's much more powerful than having to build that system on another network and then integrating with it. You know what I mean? Like it builds on each other.
Hmm.
And going back to like the proof of work as a security thing, it was it was the case when there was no ASIC miners, right? That was the assumption Satoshi made that everyone pretty much have more or less the same mining power. But especially what we're seeing happen now in the bear market is that it is no longer profitable to mine a lot of these tokens, and miners are very incentively driven. So if you have a miner sitting on a massive amount of hash power on the specialized equipment that he had invested in, and if he does the right thing, which is to keep up the network, he's doing it at a loss. What he might want to do is actually use that hashing power to attack the network. Like, just think about it. Like the Bitcoin hash power have dropped, but the machines are still there. Like, if it drops any lower, I
I think Bitcoin's a very special case,
yeah,
and I'll tell you why, which is Bitcoin's a special case because miners are disincentivized to attack the network even if they have the hash power to do it, because miners as a whole
mhm,
are sitting on, like as you just pointed out, specialized software that are really only used to mine Bitcoin or SHA-256 coins. And if
mhm,
Bitcoin was ever attacked in such a way, it would damage the reputation of cryptocurrency so much that likely it would put the miners so much at a loss that their
mhm,
short-term profits would be, you know, completely disregarded. But the security assumption is not about a miner attacking the network. It's about an entity that comes up that says, I want to attack the Bitcoin network, that doesn't have vested interests in the Bitcoin network as a whole. So,
mhm,
let's pick a random company here that everyone likes to act as the bad guy. Let's say Visa decides, I
mhm,
want to attack the Bitcoin network.
mhm,
If Visa wanted to do this, or whatever company, they would first need to, produce a bunch of hardware. I don't
mhm,
think it would be as simple as buying the hardware because obviously there's limit of supply and demand, so they'd have to produce their own hardware,
mhm,
and they'd have to invest the amount of money to do the R&D to do that, and
mhm,
into the facilities to fab the chips and all that sort of stuff, and then they would have to attack the network, and then obviously, I think as a response, the community would just simply, take fork a snapshot of the network prior to the attack with a change in proof of work, and then now the attacker has a bunch of useless hardware that they needed to create to attack the network. So I think that's the security assumption when it comes to Bitcoin mining and how proof of work protects the network.
okay, okay. Fair point, fair point. Maybe not Bitcoin, but like these for these smaller proof of work coins, I think the incentive to attack the
Yeah, I
network is
think there's
much
a huge
greater.
incentive to attack those type of coins, and
Yeah.
uh, I think I think Bitcoin miners again, they were very passive about this, and I think they're
Mhm,
too passive about this. I think that what Bitcoin miners should have done was when Bitcoin Cash launched,
mhm,
they should have killed Bitcoin Cash.
mhm. Yeah,
And I don't
exactly.
say this out of hostility for Bitcoin Cash. Likewise, if Bitcoin Cash was launched the with the majority of the hash power, because like I said before, Bitcoin Unlimited had 50% of the hash power at one point.
Mhm,
What miners of Bitcoin Cash should have done was they should have killed the old Bitcoin network. You
mhm.
shouldn't let two networks of the same proof of work algorithm that survive,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it does introduce, like I said, that incentive to attack the network financially.
yeah. Whereas you don't really see it in, well, one, it's not really feasible in these DPoS systems because again, you have the block producers, and two, there's no really reason to because they don't share the same proof of work, and therefore, like, there is no like having another network there does not disrupt you. Like, and you can see this in EOS where a lot of these sister chains actually reaching out to EOS community, and the EOS community generally is pretty positive about it. Like, they're not really
Mhm.
hostile towards it.
Yeah, I think the security assumptions, obviously, in proof of stake are a lot different than um, in proof of work. I mean, I think the most obvious regard to security vectors is So unlike in the proof of work scenario, just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean it's going to be very easy to attack the network, because you do have to go through this process of actually creating a bunch of hardware to attack the network, which in itself also does take time. In the case of a proof of stake network, it's really just a matter of buying enough tokens to attack the network. And interestingly enough, in the case of EOS, you don't even need anywhere close to 50%. You really only need somewhere close to like 3%.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, well, let's end on that note, unless you want to further elaborate that point.
No, that's pretty much all I got, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about.
No, I think I'm okay. But that was a very interesting conversation. I'm glad I have this software set up just in case we're gonna go that long. So everything is recorded. I'm gonna put it out
Cool,
and let me see what people think.
cool.
Okay, cool. I'll catch you next time then.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day, man.
You too.